The sunset behind the large mansion where her father walked painted long shadows over the neatly trimmed lawn. Cheryl adjusted the scarf around her neck, trying to look neat despite her simple clothes. At 18, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her sharp mind and strong determination showing in her gentle manner. Her father, Jack, a hard-working fruit seller, had been asked to deliver a selection of fresh, exotic fruits for a wealthy family's grand party. Tonight, Cheryl went along to help him, stepping into a world that felt completely different from their own. As she climbed out of their old, squeaky cart loaded with fruit baskets, her eyes widened at the sight of the massive house. The estate glowed with twinkling lights, and servers in spotless uniforms moved gracefully through the crowd of rich, important guests. Cheryl felt out of place in this world of wealth and elegance but tried not to show her unease. "Stay close to me," Jack whispered as they walked toward the servants' area behind the grand house. "These people, they're not like us." Cheryl nodded, her heart beating fast. She knew tonight wasn't about her, she was there to support her father and remain unnoticed. But fate had something else in store. Inside the mansion, laughter and music echoed through the large halls. Among the guests were Ethan, Elmo, and Finch, the rich sons of the city's wealthiest families. Known for their arrogance and careless behavior, they loved being the center of attention and enjoyed having control over those they thought were beneath them. The three boys leaned against the marble bar, sipping expensive drinks and looking around for something to amuse them. When their eyes landed on Cheryl, a smirk appeared on Ethan's face. "Who's that?" he asked, nudging Elmo. "Fruit seller's daughter," Elmo replied without interest. "Not worth your time." But Ethan wasn't one to pass up an opportunity for fun. "Let's see if she can handle us." Moments later, Cheryl found herself awkwardly talking to the boys. They hit her with questions, their tone full of disrespect. "So, Cheryl," Finch said slowly, "do you sell fruit like your father?" "No," Cheryl answered calmly, her voice steady, "but I'm studying to become an engineer." The boys burst out laughing. "An engineer?" Ethan mocked. "And where do you plan to work, fixing our juices?" Cheryl's face turned red, but she didn't let them see her discomfort. "One day," she said firmly, "I'll build something you depend on." Her bold reply stunned them for a moment. Then Ethan, eager to get the last word, sneered, "We'll see about that." They laughed as they walked away, leaving Cheryl standing alone. She felt both angry and humiliated but quickly shook it off. This wasn't her world, and she refused to let their cruelty affect her. She turned to look for her father, ready to leave. As the night went on, the boys' cruel plans grew worse. "She thinks she's better than us," Ethan growled, still angry from earlier. "Let's put her in her place." His words were full of hate, and the other two agreed, their drunken laughter full of menace. Cheryl remained unaware of their plotting, focused on helping her father with the last of the fruit crates. Her father, Jack, checked his watch nervously. "Cheryl, we'll leave soon," he said, sensing the tension in the air. He didn't want his daughter to stay in this dangerous situation. Cheryl nodded, stepping outside for a moment to breathe. The cool night breeze helped calm her nerves as she leaned against a pillar, looking up at the stars and imagining a life far away from this world of cruelty and wealth. But little did she know, danger was waiting just around the corner, ready to crush her dreams. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over her. She turned to see Ethan, flanked by Elmo and Finch. They were smirking, and Cheryl's heart sank. She tried to walk away, but Ethan stepped into her path. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice slick with mockery. "I don't want any trouble," Cheryl said, her tone firm but wary. She attempted to move past them again, but Finch grabbed her arm, his grip uncomfortably tight. "Relax," Finch said, his tone falsely friendly. "We just want to talk." Fear shot through her as she looked into their eyes, realizing this was no innocent encounter. "Let me go," she said, her voice rising. Ethan laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the quiet of the garden. "Why are you acting so high and mighty? You think you're better than us?" "I don't think anything," Cheryl said, struggling to free her arm. "Just leave me alone." But the more she resisted, the more entertained they seemed. Her defiance only fueled their twisted sense of power. Before she could scream, Ethan clamped a hand over her mouth and dragged her toward the back of the estate, away from the lights and noise. The next moments blurred into a nightmare. Cheryl's mind screamed in protest, but her voice was silenced by the overwhelming force of her attackers. In the darkness, they tore away her dignity, their laughter a cruel soundtrack to her pain. She fought with everything she had, but their strength and numbers overwhelmed her. When it was over, they left her broken and alone, their laughter fading as they disappeared into the night. Cheryl lay trembling on the cold ground, tears streaming down her face. Shame, anger, and fear consumed her, but the worst was the helplessness, the knowledge that no one would believe her, a fruit seller's daughter, over the privileged sons of powerful men. Some time passed before Jack found her. He had grown worried when she didn't return and began searching the estate. When he saw her crumpled form in the shadows, his heart broke. "Cheryl," he cried, rushing to her side. "What happened? Who did this?" She clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to find the words to explain. Her father held her tightly, vowing silently to protect her no matter what. He helped her to her feet and led her back to their cart, shielding her from the curious stares of other servants and guests. As they drove home, Cheryl finally spoke, her voice trembling. It was them, the Johnson boys and their friends. Jack's hands tightened on the reins. He wanted to storm back to the estate and confront them, but he knew the futility of such an action. They were rich, powerful, and untouchable. The system was designed to protect people like them, not someone like his daughter. "Don't say anything, Cheryl," Jack said softly. "If we speak out, they'll ruin us." "But Papa," Cheryl started, her voice breaking. "I know, my child," he interrupted, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "But we have no power here." The days that followed were a blur of pain and silence. Cheryl stayed confined to her room, unable to face the world. News of the incident spread among the staff at the Johnson estate, but fear kept everyone quiet. Ethan and his friends carried on with their lives as if nothing had happened, their privilege shielding them from any consequences. Cheryl's family faced subtle threats and intimidation. The Johnson family made it clear that any attempt to press charges would result in dire consequences for Jack's livelihood and Cheryl's reputation. "You think anyone will believe a fruit seller's daughter over the sons of this city's most powerful families?" a lawyer representing the Johnsons sneered during a private meeting with Jack. "Be smart and stay silent." Cheryl felt trapped, suffocated by her helplessness and the injustice of it all. But deep inside her, a spark of defiance remained. She vowed that one day, when she had the strength and the means, she would make them pay for what they had done. Cheryl walked into the grand hall with quiet confidence, her every move calculated. Heads turned as she entered, her striking presence commanding attention. Most of the guests didn't know her, but those who did whispered her name in disbelief. She spotted Ethan, Elmo, and Finch near the bar, surrounded by a group of admirers. They looked older but just as smug, their laughter echoing through the room. Cheryl's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain composed. Tonight wasn't about raw emotion, it was about strategy. Cheryl had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had dug into their lives, uncovering a web of corruption, illegal business deals, and scandals. The evidence she had gathered wasn't just about their crimes from that fateful night, it painted a broader picture of their abuse of power over the years. Her first move was subtle. She approached a journalist she had invited to the gala under the pretense of exposing a corporate scandal. The journalist, intrigued by Cheryl's reputation as the determined daughter of a fruit seller who had risen against all odds, agreed to publish a series of articles based on the evidence he had provided. As the night progressed, Cheryl began planting seeds of doubt among the guests. She struck up conversations with influential figures, dropping hints about the Johnsons' less-than-savory past. Her words were careful, calculated to sow suspicion without revealing too much. Toward the end of the evening, Cheryl made her way to the trio. Their expressions shifted from confusion to recognition as she approached. "Cheryl," Ethan said, his smirk faltering. "What are you doing here?" "I came to congratulate you," she said, her tone icy. "It seems you've built quite a legacy." Elmo's eyes narrowed. "Why do I feel like you didn't come here just to celebrate?" Cheryl leaned in, her voice low but firm. "You're right. I'm here to remind you of the night you thought you could destroy me, a fruit seller's daughter who you underestimated." Their faces paled as her words sank in. For the first time, they looked unsettled. "You can't prove anything," Finch snapped, his bravado cracking. Cheryl smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But let's see how the world reacts when they hear my story." Before they could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving them to stew in their growing panic. The next morning, the headlines hit. Articles detailing the Johnsons' illegal dealings and abusive behavior dominated the news cycle. Cheryl's story was carefully woven into the narrative, presented in a way that avoided naming her directly but painted a vivid picture of their crimes. Social media exploded with outrage, demanding accountability. Victims of the trio's other misdeeds began coming forward, emboldened by the exposure. The once celebrated businessmen found themselves cornered, their reputations in tatters. Cheryl watched from a distance, her emotions a mix of vindication and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over yet, there was still the matter of legal action, but the tide had turned. For the fruit seller's daughter who had been underestimated, this was a powerful moment of reclaiming her voice. Cheryl filed a formal case against the trio, using the evidence she had collected to build a strong argument. The Johnsons tried to use their wealth and connections to suppress the case, but public opinion was no longer on their side. Activists and media outlets rallied behind Cheryl, amplifying her voice and ensuring the case stayed in the spotlight. The legal proceedings were long and grueling, but Cheryl's preparation and resilience paid off. The court found the trio guilty of multiple crimes, including assault, fraud, and witness intimidation. Their sentences were severe, stripping them of their freedom and tarnishing their family's legacy. Cheryl's return had sent shockwaves through the community, dismantling the facade of invincibility that had protected her attackers for so long. The courtroom was crowded, the air thick with tension. Every seat was filled, and cameras from major news stations were lined up along the back wall. Cheryl, the strong daughter of a simple fruit seller, stood at the plaintiff's table, calm but determined. This was the end of years of pain, preparation, and hard work. Across from her, Ethan, Elmo, and Finch sat with their expensive lawyers, their faces showing a mix of fear and defiance. Cheryl's lawyer, Neka, started with a powerful statement that this case is about responsibility, power, and the abuse of privilege. The defendants thought their wealth and influence would protect them from justice. Today, we proved them wrong. The prosecution began presenting the evidence Cheryl had spent years collecting. Emails, bank records, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture, showing not only the assault that had changed Cheryl's life, but also a long history of criminal actions. One by one, witnesses took the stand. First was a former employee of the Johnson family, a gardener who had been quiet for years after seeing Ethan's violent behavior toward another young woman. He told the court about the threats and bribes he had faced, his voice shaky but steady. "I was too afraid to speak back then," he said, looking at Cheryl. "But seeing you fight gave me the courage to tell the truth." The most moving moment came when Cheryl took the stand herself. She told the story of that terrible night with clarity and emotion, describing the assault and what followed. Her voice didn't shake, even when the defense tried to attack her story. "I was broken," she said, her eyes locked on the jury. "But I refuse to let that be the end of my story. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who has suffered in silence because people like them think they are untouchable." Her words rippled through the courtroom, leaving a deep impact on everyone who heard them. The defense tried to make Cheryl look like she was seeking revenge and not trustworthy, but their efforts failed. The evidence was clear, and their arguments sounded weak compared to Cheryl's strength and the growing public anger. In a last-ditch effort, Ethan took the stand to defend himself. His arrogance, however, worked against him. During cross-examination by Necker, he made mistakes, contradicted himself, and unknowingly confirmed important details of the prosecution's case. The courtroom buzzed as the truth became clear. Outside, protesters gathered with signs calling for justice for Cheryl and all victims of abuse, their voices rising in support of the daughter of a fruit seller who dared to take on the powerful. The Johnsons' once perfect reputation was now ruined. Their businesses faced boycotts, and investors pulled out of deals. The trio's fall from grace was quick and public. After weeks of testimony, the jury made their decision. The courtroom was quiet as the foreman read the verdict: guilty. Guilty of assault, fraud, and witness tampering. The sentences were severe: years in prison, large fines, and the loss of their business licenses. Cheryl, the daughter of a fruit seller, breathed a sigh of relief, the weight of the years finally lifting from her shoulders. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had suffered because of their unchecked power. Later that evening, Cheryl stood outside the courthouse, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Reporters surrounded her, microphones thrust forward, but she didn't shy away. "What do you want people to take away from this case?" one journalist asked. Cheryl paused before answering, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about me or them. It's about breaking the cycle of silence and fear. No one should be above the law, no matter how rich or powerful they are." Her words resonated, sparking applause from the crowd. Cheryl had become more than just a survivor, she was now a symbol of justice and resilience. Despite the victory, Cheryl knew her journey wasn't over. The scars of her trauma would always remain, but she was determined to use her experience to help others. She returned to the city and founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting survivors of sexual violence and advocating for systemic change. The organization, named Phoenix Rising, quickly gained traction. Through legal aid, counseling, and awareness campaigns, it became a beacon of hope for countless individuals, offering them a chance to reclaim their lives and seek justice. Months later, Cheryl returned to the Johnsons' estate one last time. The grand mansion, now abandoned and falling into disrepair, stood as a haunting reminder of her past. She walked through the overgrown gardens, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Standing in the spot where her life had changed forever, she closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. But this time, instead of feeling pain, she felt a deep sense of peace. "They didn't win," she whispered to herself. "I did." With her head held high, Cheryl left the estate, ready to embrace the future she had fought so hard to create. Invitations to high society events dried up, and former allies turned their backs, fearing association with the disgraced family. Amika's family faced foreclosure on their lavish properties as legal debts mounted. Faye's father, a prominent politician, was forced to resign amid mounting public pressure. Prison life was a stark contrast to the privilege the trio had always known. Ethan, who thrived on control, now faced a world where his wealth and power meant nothing. Emeka, who relied on his charm to manipulate others, found himself isolated and despised. Faye, the quietest of the three, struggled to adapt to the harsh realities of prison life. Behind bars, they were no longer invincible, they were powerless. For the first time, they felt the same fear and helplessness they had inflicted on others. Back in their hometown, the community that had once revered the Johnson family began speaking out. People who had been silenced for years found the courage to share stories of mistreatment and exploitation. Former employees detailed the abuse of power and the fear they endured while working for the Johnsons. Cheryl, the daughter of a humble fruit seller, watched their downfall with mixed emotions. It wasn't triumph she felt, but a sense of responsibility. Sitting in her office at Phoenix Rising, she journaled her thoughts. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about ensuring no one else suffers as I did. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of something bigger. Years later, Cheryl reflected on how far she had come. Visiting her father, now retired and living a peaceful life in the home she had bought for him, she felt a sense of peace. Sitting in their garden as the sun set, they shared a quiet moment. "You've changed so many lives, Cheryl," her father said, pride evident in his voice. She smiled, gripping his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, Papa. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Her father's eyes welled with tears. "Your strength gave me hope. I'm so proud of you, and I know your mother would be too." Cheryl smiled back, feeling a renewed sense of purpose as she prepared for the next chapter of her journey. Thank you for watching. If you know someone who needs this, share this story with her and please like and subscribe to our African Tales by Zeri channel.